Luca Watson, the political commentator from Young Voices UK, is here to go through the papers in more detail. Luca, good morning.
Good morning.
Is it a betrayal? It's surely too early to be able to say that on this Brexit deal and post-Brexit deal when you haven't even seen it.
Well, yes, and I think the problem that Starmer's going to have is, given his credentials as an arch Remainer, is that any kind of deal he comes up with, any concessions he gives, is going to be labelled as some sort of betrayal. And I think he has more latitude than perhaps some of the papers will seem to give him, given that I think for a lot of people, they're even having some regrets over Brexit. Oh, around half the population, of course, was against it in the first place. So I think, calling it a betrayal already is a bit too early.
Yeah, well, we'll see exactly how the day develops. Let's move on to some of the other political stories around today. And the Times political section this morning is talking about the job scheme to try and get more people back into work. The analysis here is fewer than 100,000 will find work through Labour's job scheme. Remind us what the scheme is and why there are concerns that actually it's not going to shift the dial too much.
Well, yes, this job scheme was announced alongside cuts to benefits. And so there was around £1 billion, I believe, allocated, with the idea being that people who were having their benefits cut, this would help them get into work and no longer need to rely on benefits. But analysis shows that apparently maximum around 100,000 people will actually be helped by this, whereas around millions of people, I think about 3 million or so people.
We've just lost Luca. We'll try and re-establish the connection with him. The story, though, inside the papers, you remember we talked about it here on the programme. I think it was about 3 weeks ago. So the whole idea is to get as many people back to work as possible. Keir Starmer said, look, I want you to back this kind of £5 billion worth of welfare cuts, trying to stave off a rebellion. I think Luca's back. Luca, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Sorry, continue what you were saying.
Yes, I was just saying, so this was Labour's way of essentially selling the benefit cuts, being that, yes, they would be cutting benefits, but they would also be helping people get back into work. So long term, it will be more sustainable for everyone. But it seems like only around 100,000 people will be helped back into work compared to the millions of people who face some sort of benefit cut.
Yes. And so then what do? See if it works, try and improve it?
Well, some sort of benefit reform is probably inevitable. I mean, it's becoming a huge cost, and the number of people relying on benefits has gone up and up and up, and it's really ballooned since the pandemic, especially. So something has to be done. But it would seem like, especially for Labour backbenchers, it's going to be a hard sell now for the Prime Minister.
Absolutely. And when we're looking at people's budgets, we've now got a new story inside the Times. I mean, this is probably not going to surprise anyone hugely, but only 1 in 10 people under the age of 44 can afford to buy a first home. You know, the Prime Minister has promised, with the Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, whose brief covers housing, that they would build 1.5 million new homes over the course of this government. But it's a tiny proportion of people, even if those homes are there, who can afford them.
Yes, I mean, it'll be no surprise if anyone's been tracking house prices and the way they've constantly been going up and up and up, whilst wages have stagnated, that fewer and fewer people are now able to afford them. I think part of the idea behind this surge in new builds that the government is aiming for is that it will help to bring down, maybe in real terms at least, house prices as supply increases. But yeah, that could be a real problem, that even if all these houses are built, no one can actually afford to buy them.
Yeah, I mean, that is the problem. The issue here is that the house builders may be reluctant, the developers may be reluctant to build them if they think there's insufficient demand. It's not that there isn't demand, there isn't demand that's actually achievable or affordable.
Yeah, there's plenty of demand for housing, of course. It's just that at the market rate, and especially in a lot of areas in big cities in the southeast especially, it's so expensive that people simply don't have the money for it. And so developers are calling on the government to introduce more schemes like Help to Buy and so on, which could make it easier for people to try and get on that housing ladder. But it's going to be a real struggle.
And when you look at the data in a bit more detail, so this modelling suggests that sort of 10% of people in that age bracket, age 20 to 44, and 20 admittedly would be quite young, I think, to afford to do it. But, you know, in your early 40s, your late 30s. However, they say when you actually drill down into that group, many of them were only able to buy because they were in a relationship. So if you actually just say as a single adult, it's less than 3% who are in a financial position to be able to buy their own home. I mean, that is really stark.
Yeah, that's minuscule, and I wonder as well how many people will be relying upon finances, perhaps from their parents or grandparents, inheritances, and so on, to get through it. But it's becoming increasingly impossible to, on a single income, buy your own home.
Yeah, well, you can read more about that in the paper. Front page of the Sun today is this exclusive from the paper saying Gary Lineker is today going to announce he's leaving the BBC and won't be fronting the World Cup coverage next year, following, of course, that anti-Semitism, Ralph, as a post that he posted on Instagram that had an emoji of a rat on it. He apologised, deleted it, but the Sun's scoop here is that actually time is up. Do you think that's the right decision?
I think it's the right decision. I mean, his time was coming to an end anyway. He'd already agreed many months ago that he'd be stepping back. But I think, given the controversy that now surrounds him, especially after this post, but also that has done for years now, given his quite proactive involvement in politics, it's right for him to step back fully now.
Yeah. You wonder why this maybe took so long, if this was going to be the decision.
Well, I mean, he already agreed to step down from his role at Match of the Day. I think essentially he realized his position was untenable. He's pretty adamant that he wants to keep on campaigning on political issues. I mean, now that this recent one to do with Israel and Palestine is particularly controversial, but of course, for years he's spoken about Brexit, he's spoken about other issues, and of course, as a BBC presenter, you're quite limited in what you're meant to opine on. And clearly, he saw that as a restriction on his freedom. And after, I mean, to be fair, it's been there, I think, 26 years. So sooner or later, it had to come to a close.
Yeah, well, we'll get more detail on exactly how that all developed in the sports news just after the news at past. Front page of the Telegraph today is a story about paternity leave, and the Princess of Wales, so says the paper, has inspired one of Britain's leading businesses to give new fathers 6 months of fully paid paternity leave. This is, Catherine's attempt to say, look, businesses need to invest in early childhood, and part of that, she's making the case, should be that they can spend much more time with their dad in the very few first early months of their life. 6 months paternity leave sounds like a great idea, doesn't it?
Well, it does certainly for the expectant fathers, I imagine, a huge increase over the standard 2 weeks. I'm sure many of them will be very happy, and I think as well from a greater societal standpoint, one of the functions of this is to try and equalize between men and women, mothers and fathers. How attractive it would be to companies, because women typically now take far, far longer in maternity leave, and that can sometimes hamper career development. If men were to take a similar amount of time off once they have children, then that can equalize the playing field a bit as well.
So that doesn't feel likely to happen, does it? If it's Deloitte who are going to introduce this. So, because we know new fathers are entitled to a minimum of 2 weeks, up to a year for mothers. Do you think men will take this offer up? Because I think they might think, oh, right, well, there are downsides to this as well, as you just talked about the career development. And they might say, oh, maybe I'll take a month. But 6 months out of the office, out of the workforce, feels like, that would be a bit of a hurdle when you come back to. Do you think men will be persuaded to do it? To say spending time with your child would be the better option?
I think it'll definitely depend and depend what they're doing in their career advancement, and so on. I think you're right. For many, it will just feel too long, and there'll be a worry that if you take such a long time out, you'll fall behind, and when you come back to work, you won't make the same career progress that you otherwise would have done. And so they might politely decline the offer to take 6 months off. But for those who, for perhaps their first time fathers, or perhaps the mother is especially keen to have some sort of support at home, I think at least the opportunity, the availability of the scheme will be very much appreciated.
We'll see. Let me know what you think about that. I've got a couple of friends I know who've taken sort of longer paternity leave, but they are very much in the minority, and the rules have changed. So, and often you can split the maternity and paternity pay, but it very much feels like it's sort of the women taking it rather than the men. And there's a story about Greggs inside the Sun. There's a Greggs close to me, and it is pretty miserable, I have to say, going past it, because the shoplifting is so prolific that the workers there have sort of taken to, instead of, they don't apprehend the people stealing, but there's one shop worker who will often sort of follow the shoplifter out and shout that person's stolen and their bag is full of stolen goods, and sort of shame them. I mean, I think some of the workers are in a bit of despair because they don't know what to do. The Sun is reporting that Greggs is in some stores ditching the sort of self-serve fridges to say, you're going to have to ask for your stuff behind the counter, because simply they can't trust that people won't just walk in, grab stuff and leave. I mean, It sounds like a sensible idea, Luca, but it's a pretty sad story.
Well, it might be sensible for Greg's, but I think what it shows is a really worrying trend of law and order increasingly breaking down and society getting worse as a result. And these are sort of the gradual signs of decay that a once high trust society is becoming increasingly less so. And so, yeah, in part that will mean food now has to be behind counters. Greg's now have security guards at some of their stores, which is just, I mean, it seems a bit ridiculous that a bakery would need security guards. And so I think this just points to a wider trend of law and order breaking down, and especially the police not doing their job.
Yeah. Final story I want to ask you about, Luca. Would you confidently know how to use a semicolon?
I'm not sure about confidently. I am a big fan of the semicolon, but I do realize it's a bit of a dying breed.
Yeah, the semicolon is at risk of dying out because young people don't know how to use it correctly. What do you think's happening here? I think actually we just spend more time, younger people, sort of texting, and therefore your sentences are a bit incomplete and don't have proper grammar in them, which means you end up with few trends like this.
Well, perhaps that's an interesting theory. Yeah, I mean, I thought it would have been particularly down to AI and the fact that AI models seem to never really use semicolons. They're much keener on M dashes. But this story apparently shows that it's a trend that precedes AI. So yes, perhaps messaging and texting and the breakdown of grammar in that form of communication could be a potential reason for this.
Luca, thank you as ever. Luca Watson, the political commentator with Young Voices UK.